Well, welcome again to the Straight Truth Podcast. I'm your host, Josh Philpot, and as always, I'm joined by Pastor Richard Caldwell, the pastor of Founders Baptist Church and also president of Walking in Grace Ministries. Now, for this season of Straight Truth, we have three special guests that are joining us. First, we have Dr. Bruce Ware, professor of Christian theology at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary, and also Dr. Tom Schreiner, also professor of New Testament at the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. And these two brothers are pastors and elders at Clifton Baptist Church in Louisville, Kentucky. Lastly, we're joined by Pastor Mike Fabarez, pastor of Compass Bible Church in Southern California. Now, as always, please leave us a comment on social media or on YouTube and let us know what you're thinking about as we discuss these important issues. Well, I'd like to direct this question at Mike first and foremost, because these two brothers are teaching directly in a seminary, and then there are also elders at a church, but you are pastoring full-time. And as you said, you also get to teach adjunctly. I wonder, when you look across sort of the spectrum of theological seminaries and seminary education, what are your concerns that you see? Maybe just American education and maybe things that encourage you too, as you look at a place like Master Seminary or maybe Southern Baptist Seminary. Yeah. What are your concerns and also things you're?
I'm not sure my concerns are easily solved, because I know there are constraints with the times and how many units are, possibly going to fit into a program. But when I look for pastoral staff members or people that are going to plant in our church association, there's so much need for the practical areas of fleshing out our theology, either in biblical counseling or in homiletics or even church management and leadership. It's not unusual in some seminaries to have graduates that have a Master's of Divinity in their hand, but they've never even taught a Sunday school class. They've not really cut their teeth in any kind of practical ministry with people. They love theology, they love to read historical theology, they love that kind of world, but they then get out of that and they want a job in a church. They want to serve the body, but they've got no experience in serving the body. And I think that's why even at your church, having an internship is just it's a necessity. We need to have more of that in theological education. I want to see more church ministry work as a part of the essential requirement, even if it's just a required internship that everyone must go through if they're going to go and get a Master of Divinity, right? I mean, we want you to be at least experienced in cutting your teeth in real life church work.
That's good. Well, Pastor Caldwell, I mean, again, from your perspective too, primary role, preaching pastor teacher at a church, do you have concerns that when you look across the theological spectrum? Or?
My concerns are Mike's. Is the exact concern I share, and that is that young men have training that involves an evaluation of their character. How well do we know these young men before they graduate? Are we helping to shape their character in such a way that they meet the qualifications for pastors? Found in 1 Timothy 3 and Titus 1. And then the experience factor. Are they getting experience in ministry so that we can evaluate their giftedness, evaluate their abilities? A question I would have for Tom and Bruce in terms of where they serve, how many young men do you think now begin their seminary education with the goal being to serve as a pastor in the local church versus men now who are going to seminary to be trained for some other reason? What do you think the percentage is?
Well, I think at Southern, which is unusual, we have a much higher percentage of those who want to pursue being a pastor.
It's encouraging.
Our MDiv program is huge, and the MDiv, of course, is the degree for pastor missionary training. As many schools have succumbed to kind of a market-driven necessity of accentuating their MA programs. So they have this proliferation of different MA degrees, and the MDiv is suffering in so many places. But by God's grace, thankfully, at Southern, the MDiv is still king, and we like that. That doesn't mean necessarily that when they graduate with an MDiv that they're going to be trained in all the ways they need to be a pastor.
Right.
In fact, I don't think seminaries can do that. I think it's an overstatement of both the intent and the effectiveness of a seminary to say that they can do everything necessary to produce someone who is at graduation prepared to be a pastor. We can do best in the classical areas. You know, Greek and Hebrew and Bible and theology, those are the areas where we excel. But the kinds of things that you gentlemen are raising in terms of effectiveness in ministry, I think you have to get out there and do it. You've got to be involved in it, which can take place to some degree while you're in school, but most of it has to happen when you're done. And
well, that's why the internship approach that Mike described is so important. Actually being able to mentor students and have that kind of influence on them. Tom, you talked earlier about a partnership, or Bruce may have, about a partnership between the seminary and the local church. What are some ways that you think that could happen more effectively? If indeed, you know, if there are limits to what the institutional seminary can promise to a student, how do you make those connections in our world?
I mean, I think one of the things Southern does is many of our churches do have an internship. So if students can go in and practice ministry under wise pastors with experience, I think that's probably the most helpful thing we can do to help our students.
Do you, brothers at Clifton, do you encourage the ones who come to the church that are students, do you encourage them to be involved in the ministry of the church as part of their training to be a pastor? Or do you often say, and I'm sure the spectrum is wide, do you say, sit under the preaching and ministry of the word for a long time and work on your education, and then when there's appropriate time, then get more involved in the ministry?
Yeah, I think we say both. It depends on the person.
Sure.
Sometimes people come to us actually who have experience and they're hurting and they're wounded, and they even say to us, well, I need a time to recover.
Right.
I need to just sit and be healed by the preaching of the word. But then we also encourage students to be involved in ministry. And one thing we say to our students that I think is very helpful is there's not a lot of opportunities to teach at Clifton.
Yeah, right.
We have a lot of gifted people like Bruce Ware in our church. So we'll say to them, teaching children. And Sean Wright says this all the time. You know Sean well.
I do.
Sean will say, if you can't teach the children, you can't teach adults. And I think that is so true.
That's good.
Because our children, they are eager to learn generally. And if you can teach clearly God's word and truth to children, you probably are gifted to teach adults as well.
That's good.
Also tests a man's humility at that point, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, how formative are those tasks in the church for somebody who desires to be maybe a preaching pastor later on? How formative are those?
I mean, those experiences where there's many more things you could say, but just learning what it means to be a regular lay participant in church ministry. So you're there every Sunday in the nursery, or you're there every Sunday with the junior high group, or whatever the case might be, and you feel what they feel is an awfully good thing to have as a pastor. You know, so you understand what's going on out there in your church ministries, plural. So it's very good to have some exposure in different areas of church ministry.
Yeah, teaching the kids, youth, adults, working in the nursery. I mean, all those things are important.
Yeah, I mean, just personally, when I went to Southern, I knew there were probably 3,000 or 4,000 guys there that all wanted to be pastors, which is why I went. And I decided to look for jobs where I could play the piano or sing so that I could still get involved in the church quickly. And it just so happened that ends up being what I do.
Right.
So it was a real blessing in that regard as I got my theological training.
You know, it was a blessing for me in my undergrad to be at a school at a time when they required certain things that were kind of out of the box. I had to, for a semester, do nothing but door-to-door evangelism for a whole semester on Saturdays. One semester I had required to serve in a nursing home and spending Sunday afternoons at a nursing home. And I look back on those requirements. I never would have chosen to do that when I was just learning to love theology and the Bible. But it was so formative and helpful for me to really do things outside of the church that were an extension of the ministry of Christ that allows me now as a pastor to say, Well, of course, that's what our church is going to be involved in. I mean, we're an evangelistic organization. We want to reach people for Christ. I learned practical apologetics while doing a lot of that. I'm in a classroom learning systematic theology, but there at a front door dealing with a guy on the north side of Chicago who doesn't believe there's a God. I don't think there's enough of that going on within theological education, and it is great, and I'm all for it. And I taught Sunday school class, 7th grade boys, and it was helpful, and that was one of my requirements. But I do think there's more in terms of defending your faith and evangelizing the lost that needs to be built in to at least an encouragement. And again, Bruce is right. The seminary has a slot, and they're hitting those, and they're gifted and positioned to do that well. But at some point, to at the very least encourage, and perhaps at the most say, you've got to put in some hours outside of your curriculum to do the things that you're going to really be concerned with as a pastor when you get there.
Mike, you guys have started, or you're starting a school for that purpose, aren't you?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it really goes back to Compass Bible Institute we're about to launch. It goes back to looking at the late 1800s and the movement of the Bible Institute movement. They recognized there was a gap between maybe the classical training for a pastor and the guy who's sitting in a church with really no tools to do ministry. And they launched a movement that became the Bible Institute movement, and so much grew out of that, including a lot of the seminaries in our country today, because they said we need to get back into the place of teaching people in practical ways that gives them more of a formalized theological training, but not the way you might train, certainly back in the 1800s, a man for ministry to be a doctor or a reverend, but we need, and I love the word you use, churchmen. We need more churchmen who are capable of leadership within the church. So Compass Bible Institute is designed, and it's in its just infantile fledgling stage now, to try and put those back together without concerns about accreditation requirements, but just how can we get people that need to learn to be good, solid, educated churchmen that know what it is to be on the front line of ministry. And so internship, hardly, don't even need that word. You're going to be involved in ministry. That's going to be part of your curriculum. You're going to be teaching, you're going to be evangelizing, you're going to be doing apologetics, but you're also going to be learning at least the undergrad level basics of theology and Bible that you need to do ministry.
Thanks again for joining us for the Straight Truth podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Now, you can find links to all of our social media channels by going to our website, straighttruth.net. Now, do us a favor. Please go to our YouTube channel and subscribe to these episodes there. We release new episodes every Thursday. Also, go to the iTunes podcast section and leave us a review. Now, Straight Truth is a production of Walking in Grace Ministries. For more information, go to walkingingrace.org.